Yeah, don't worry. Just give us a phone, okay?
No.
Tears roll as some applicants get rejected in their bid to get enlisted into the Ghana Immigration Service.
Stop crying.
One of the major disqualification factors is height.
Very sad.
I couldn't meet the target with regards to the height.
Minimum 1 meter 73 centimeters for males and 1 meter 63 centimeters for females.
When you input your data into the system, you enter your own height, what you have. But they will be checking the height physically on the ground to see whether what you put into the system is the correct one.
Chief Superintendent Alfred Fifi Okran, in charge of intelligence, explains.
Because he wanted a system to pick him, he inputted a height which is not original so that the system can qualify him for him to get entrance. So that is why we are here to do the physical checking. So those who have manipulated the system by inputting wrong information, physically when we check, they will take you out. And the moment we disqualify you, the system close your page automatically. So there's no way you can find a way to come back onto the entrance so that you can still go through the system.
Disqualification also stretches into the realm of other factors like tattoos and body piercings.
The search for your body, tattoo, all those piercing, ear piercing. So if you have one, you are not qualified for that.
I was kind of nervous, but I went through, so it was.
You have a great body. Were they mesmerized by that?
Well, they were actually really tough on us, but we actually went through.
There should be no piercing for males. Yes, that one will automatically disqualify you because it's part of the standard that was set. For females, there should be one piercing. If it's more than one, will be disqualified. With tattoo, visibly will disqualify you, both male and female, because part of the standard. Uniform has our own language, and there are basic standards that we set. No tattoos, no double piercing or excessive, no excessive stretch marks, then scars, surgical scars.
Today, the process is moving faster and the numbers are going down. For some, it's the end of the road, but for others, it's a progression to the next stage.
If you see people coming through this lane, it means they've been disqualified by height. If you see them coming through this lane, it means they've been disqualified by body selection, and they have what they are looking for. Those who are coming through here on the larger part have sailed through. It is yet to be seen how many will be disqualified and how many will be writing the aptitude test on Saturday. But definitely somebody will be picked. Reporting for Joy News, Erastus Asaredonko, Kumasi.
All right, so as you've seen, this week has seen thousands of young people throng these designated centers for screening to be enlisted for exercises for possible enlistment into the Ghana Immigration Service. Many have had their hearts broken, as you saw there, because they were disqualified for one reason or another. I'm sure many have been questioning some of the criteria. Why is a tattoo or body piercing a problem? Why can't the service enlist short people? What's their problem with short people? What's the service's problem with excessive stretch marks? And we'll be getting some understanding on as to why this is happening. But on Twitter, we have the video on Twitter, and it turns out that it's gone quite far. We have, what, about 1,200 retweets and 666 quote tweets. So we have Ura Amo saying, I'm patiently waiting to hear from the human rights people. And Coco says, did he just say no excessive stretch marks and scars? Please find a better alternative for disqualification and stop being petty. Mami Efia also said, I thought I heard it wrong. Jeffrel says, that's sad. Ghana Brixton says, very unfortunate. And Michael says, short people are rejected by girls regularly, and now immigration too. Oh. So what should they do? Sad world. Yeah, really. Come to think of it. Now, sad Ghana, please. And this is very sad to hear that your body type disqualifies you from working at Ghana Immigration. It is really sad. What can be done to stop this? Not to even talk about stretch marks and scars. That's just ridiculous. Kweku says, Sham, we all know there are no jobs. They just want to lower the unemployment situation sentiment by conducting the sham recruitment exercise. So yeah, you can say that, but that's not really the case. This criteria has been there for a while now. Essentially, it's been there for ages. And we're getting to understand why it was actually introduced in the first place, especially at a time when we have a lot of technology. Technology abounds. People are not actually going out there to fight wars anymore. They're using equipment, they're using gadgets, they're using weapons. So we'll be getting into that conversation. I also posted it on Facebook, and there are those who are asking, why should they, but they shouldn't worry. They shall one day become the president of Ghana, since there's a record of historical antecedents in the near future shall prove them the right to be one. Okay, not quite getting that reference there to the president. Okay, but the president is indeed Commander-in-Chief of the Ghana Armed Forces. So, yeah. But yes, let's get into the conversation. And joining us, we have Adam Bona. He's a security analyst. I'm sure he would have had some understanding of where and why these things were introduced into the Ghana Armed Forces, into the security agencies.
Yeah. Okay, so good morning, sir. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, great. So I think obviously we want to start with the height conversation, but we're also joined by FESTUS ABOAGYE.
Colonel FESTUS ABOAGYE.
Colonel FESTUS ABOAGYE, yes. So good morning to you, Colonel, as well.
Yeah, good morning.
Okay, so actually let me start with you, Colonel, this morning, and I've just been reading about the height requirements. That's what really seems to be on the top of the minds of most Ghanaians this morning. Now, the U.S. Army, for example, also have height restrictions. You have to fall within a certain height bracket. Now, the reason that they have said for their height restrictions is the fact that apparently height correlates with strength. And so, because soldiers are required to carry heavy armor and do all of that, they need people who are strong. Is that the same reason that we are given as Ghanaians? Is that reason moot, especially for the fact that, there's a lot less of carrying guns and stuff that's going on in the world right now? Are we sticking to that same reason as well?
Well, there could be. But let's take a very commonsensical approach to the question of height.
Okay.
Now, when you are a bit short, below a certain height level, you equate to being a dwarf. And dwarfism is, let me call it a deformity. But in practice, you see that the vehicles that are used, those that carry human beings and goods, have a certain height. The average service personnel must be able to jump into those vehicles and out without any assistance. Now, a dwarf would need to be lifted, that is assisted, to get into the vehicle and probably to get out. The other practical experience that I can relate to is that when we form up to go on route marches, on parade, but especially route marches, as a form of training, we put all the short people in front and all the tall people to the rear. And you see that the shorter people take shorter steps, and then the taller people take longer steps. Now, in practice, if you are tall, you realize that you are spending a lot of energy to reduce your long steps to short steps to cope with the shorter people. If you reverse it and put the taller people in front, they will outstrip the shorter people. So below a certain height, you are creating, let me call it capability issues, or you're creating problems for a team. So these are some of the reasons about height. There could be also logistical reasons that when you clothe your service personnel, especially in this country where we are, we don't have databases of averages to say that 10% of let's say, immigration officers are within this height bracket and so on. So you make a very rough estimate, and then you order the uniforms. And then the taller people probably will have to go and loosen the end in order to wear those uniforms. The shorter people have to go and cut off, and reduce the sizes and so on. Something that I call cost expenditure. Because the service is not paying, they think that it's not a cost. But it's a cost to the individual, especially when they don't have service tailors to alter those uniforms for them. So I go for the height. Around the world, it looks to be the tradition. And once it is so, it suggests that it has been designed, based on historical experience, that below 5'5", thereabout for women and 5'8" for men. If you recruit such persons, you might have issues within the team with operational aspects, like, as I said, jumping onto and off vehicles and so on and so forth. And as somebody has suggested, there could also be a biological or medical reason that, when you are dwarfed, some, processes within your body might not have formed very well or performed very well, and therefore you might have some kind of deficiency. But I'll leave that to the medical experts, and I don't want to venture into the human rights aspects.
Right.
But let me also say that the Army, for instance, height levels are lower than that for the police. And the experience shows that in some tactical situations, you need smaller, shorter people to navigate through very difficult places, like going through holes, assuming caves and so on. So there's a pros and cons to the debate. But obviously, you're not going to be able to take somebody who is 3 feet tall, and recruit them into your security services. Granted that, as I think Israel was suggested, such persons could probably do some office work, logistics work, sitting and counting boots and socks and uniforms, or typing and those kinds of things, But if you standardize it, it's better. Everybody knows the standard, and then we go by the standards. Do we still need to go by these standards that are ages old, or we need to reform them? There are aspects that I think we need to reform, and height will be one of them.
All right. When
you say that you agree with the fact that maybe we need to reform some of these things, what would your recommendations be in terms of height? And how would these recommendations then counter the problems that you have raised that, shorter people would face if they joined the Army? So
we need now to have a scientific approach to it. So it's not a matter of sitting around the table and deciding that, okay, the Ghana Armed Forces or Immigration or Fire Service or whatever can recruit 3 feet tall people. You need to scientifically look at the question, bring in medical experts, then bring in, the soldiers also, who are also experts. Like, as I've said, any time we used to go on route marches, those of us who are a bit taller, and especially those who are very tall, were spending a lot of energy because the shorter people were not going as fast as they could, And even in immigration, you could have those kinds of tactical situations if you are deployed in some border areas and so on, So height still matters. The question is, how low do you go?
How low do you go?
How low do you go should be the question. And the answer must come from scientific assessment and scientific estimates and operational as well as institutional appraisal before we can alter, these kinds of standards. I have other comments, but I think you now want to focus on
all right.
So I'll leave it at that.
All right, so we'll come back and look at the other criteria that they're using to disqualify people. But I'll bring in Adam Bona here. Adam Bona, so we'd also want to understand what you make of this height restriction.
Yes, just like my colleague Festus, did put out, it's important not to equate the security agencies to the other organizations where mainly people, for instance, if you wanted to be a journalist, there are there could be specific requirements you would have to meet, either educationally, experience, and all that. And I think when your producer called me yesterday, if you monitor, what's the name, the Al Jazeera's, the CNN, and the BBC's and the rest, usually take a look at reporters who report at the war front. You would notice that they are people with a certain build, with a certain height. The truth is that if you are going to report in the war front, or you are going to be working with security agencies, then chances are that your ability to move, your strength should be, if not at par to them, it should be your ability to go along with them, stay with them, should not be impeded by your height. And just like you said, look at most of the security agencies, the vehicles they use. These are rugged vehicles. These are vehicles that your ability to jump in sometime, unaided, jump out unaided is very important. And there are times that you would have to, take a good jump to either cross through some streams or rivers or, dirty waters and all that. And so these are very important things that the security agencies all over the world take into consideration. So if you look at the requirement, if you looked at soldiers in the US, if you looked at soldiers, police officers in the US, Britain, and the rest, there are some minimum height and all that they take into consideration. Even though one will say that probably the situation must be relooked at, I would say that there has to be, usually there is a requirement. I don't know whether that is done here, but how many people do you need at a certain height who probably should join the team but are smart enough to do intel? They will be deployed to planes, because it's not every soldier, it's not every police officer, who wears uniform. There are some who are recruited to perform other tasks. But for general duty officers, you must meet the general standard requirement. If you don't meet them, I'm wondering what would be, probably would make from, these agencies. I have heard about the scars and all that. I don't know if you want me to veer into that, Israel.
We'll come to the scars bit, but there are many people who look at this height restriction and they say that, well, it's just in all the other criteria that have been introduced, and they're saying that you can use that maybe for the Ghana Armed Forces and the other security agencies, but when it comes to the immigration service, where a lot of the people, or a considerable number of the people, end up in offices and be sitting behind desks. So why do we introduce that in the first place?
No, it is not right. Anybody who tells you immigration officers largely sit in the offices, it is an insignificant number of them who sit predominantly in the offices. The reason is that immigration officers, in the past, they used to be called, the border, it has to do with border. But even today, it has metamorphosed into what they do today is largely policing our borders. Most of them, if you go to Elubo, you go to Aflao, they stay in the thick of the forest, they stay in the bushes, most of them largely. And as we speak, forwarding bases are getting built for them across because of, illicit firearms coming in and, terrorists who are likely to come in. And so you have them, anyone who tells you that immigration officers largely, you only see when you go to Aflao, for instance, how many of them would you see within the post? Most of them have been deployed along the, what was the name? The unapproved routes. Just like in the US, you go to the US-Mexico border, you will not find officers, but you will see the Homeland Security officers, those who are in charge of border patrols patrolling. And so probably we have it is something people have cultivated, thinking that as an immigration officer you sit in the office. No, it is just an insignificant number who sit in the office. But their work predominantly is to ensure that the borders are safe. Those who are coming in at the airport, yes, are checked. But one cannot use that as a basis to say, because of that, let's get the height. Just like my colleague Festus did say, yes, we might have to look at it from a more scientific, empirical base, but there has to be a requirement from the immigration people themselves, based on experience on the field, that we need a certain height. But it looks like over the years, they have maintained the status quo, so that when you ask them to explain, they are not able to tell you that for Elubo, we notice it because the conditions in Elubo will be different from Hamile, and therefore we need maybe slightly shorter people in Hamile, or what do we? So these are conversations that some of us are expecting them to bring on the table for probably perusal.
All right. Now, let me bring you in again, Colonel FESTUS AbOAGYE. So let's look at the other criteria that's being used to disqualify people. There's talk of body piercing, for instance, and excessive stretch marks. Can you please explain to us why these things are necessary?
Well, I think in very general terms, let's use scarring. That for the security services, you're going to wear uniform. And the uniform would include trousers tucked into boots for long hours, especially if you're on operation. So you generate a lot of heat. And the experience has shown that some scars can regenerate and become fresh wounds, especially towards the lower limbs, the feet, and so on and so forth. So in general, scarring must be to the minimum. And any scarring around your feet will be a good reason why you should be disqualified, because you're going to have injuries of your scars regenerating. So I don't have any qualms with that. Indeed, I will fully endorse that. Let me also add that we look at how you stand, your gait. And normally, you must have the opening in your sole. You must not be flat-footed. Because those who are flat-footed spend a lot of energy when they walk, scientifically, more than those who have those openings. So in the Ghana Armed Forces, for instance, and I believe that goes for the other security services, any flat-footed person will be disqualified. You must also not be bow-legged, extreme bow-legged. A bit of it is fine. We see footballers and so on, sports persons who are bow-legged. A bit of it. But beyond a certain range, bow-leggedness will disqualify you. And I think the question about the scarring applies to the piercing of the ears. But that is the one that I would least support. That I cannot relate how any piercing of the ears, whether one on each side, or two on each side, or three on each side, should be one of the criteria for disqualifying anybody from recruiting or enlisting into these services. I am tempted to think that piercing that are being equated or associated with certain lifestyles, and that probably from the colonial times, our masters decided that they don't want those kinds of people in their services. And then we have maintained them. When you wear hats, they don't cover your ears. It's only the fragmentation jacket, or let's call it the helmet, that will cover your ear. So there is some sense that under certain climatic conditions, extreme temperatures, your ear piercings may probably regenerate into wounds. But the question is, if you have one on each side, does it make a difference if you have two on one side and one on the other,
yeah, exactly,
or two on both sides? So I don't think that is something that I will endorse. You are looking for people who can perform a function. The function lies in other areas like strength, physical fitness, medical fitness, your aptitude, your academic, competencies, and so on. Now, your ears and how they appear, I don't think should be part of the criteria. Then you come to this tattooing that has become so fashionable these days, to the extent that even Christians have stopped believing in Old Testament rules. Because in Leviticus, I believe that there is this detailed, prescription of, putting any marks on your body. But when you tattoo your body, you have altered your skin. You have pierced the skin and you have altered it. And therefore, there is a likelihood that under certain conditions, those piercings can regenerate into wounds. Again, lastly, tattooing is associated with certain lifestyles. I don't want to mention them, but we know that, there are people who are probably drug addicts, they drink too much, they are antisocial people and so on and so forth. And you don't want those kinds of traits, in your security services. So I will endorse tattooing. It makes you stand out as somebody who doesn't conform and so on. So tattooing should be equated to scarring or scars. I will endorse that.
All right.
But the ear piercing, I have serious issues about why any man or woman who has pierced the ears should not be, enlisted into some of these services.
All right. Adam Bona, do you also have a problem with ear piercing requirement?
Well, I believe the ear piercing requirements could probably, yes, I have a bit of a problem with it, in the sense that I believe they are taking it from the point of view of, those who do that probably are not very disciplined. Those who do that are people who kind of probably have led a certain lifestyle. And so I think that should be it. But when you also take, the issue of, body tattoos, tattoos usually is also related to, some persons who belong to gangs or gangsters, who belong to various cults and all that. And so if you were deployed as a soldier, for instance, and you were caught as a prisoner of war, you should be able sometimes to disguise yourself, or sometimes you have some of these gangsters finding their way into some of these services. So as much as possible, I think now the issue, some of these things have been relaxed in the US and in other places when it has to do with the tattoo. But obviously, once you alter your skin, chances are that could generate into sore, and the issue of scars. You is that if you were, let's say, a police officer, an immigration officer, and you were deployed on our highway and you were dropped in the middle of nowhere and you were supposed to be wearing a combat boot, for instance, you are likely to be there with your ration, just a bit of water, a bit of this, a bit of that, and you stay there for weeks, or you are lost. You were in a certain group and you lost your way. You end up in your boots for weeks. The chances are that you go through water, you dry up, you go, and so your the skin, if part of your skin, is weak because you have had some tattoos or you have had, scars, surgical scars, some chances are that they would degenerate into sores and get infected. And that could lead to probably you not being able to, continue with the rest of the group. And so these are usually the general requirement. But specifically, I do believe that for those who are recruited for other purposes, so for instance, if you are recruited as a military nurse, as a military doctor, there are certain criteria you might not need to meet. And so these are some of the things I have heard when you read the comments, people thinking that this is, is ridiculous, but it is not. If you have ever been part of some of these, agencies when they are deployed, then you would understand how tedious it is. I'm sure my colleague Colonel will tell you what it takes if you are deployed and you have to be in your boots for days on ending, what it takes to do that. And it's not something for the faint-hearted, Israel.
So, I mean, I'm just reading on the internet and just trying to get a little bit more familiar with some of what the other armies in the world do. Now, for example, the U.S., and I'll use the U.S. again because, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. have been in a lot more wars, for example, than Ghana has been. But the U.S. allows tattoos. They consider two things: the placement of the tattoo and the message of the tattoo. So we know that they don't allow tattoos on the arms and, you know, above the neck and all of that, but they have it on the face and also what the tattoo says. Is that saying that perhaps countries like the United States have not considered, you know, walking through swamps or, you know, being uncomfortable in your uniform? And maybe I even dare say that U.S. soldiers have had to face maybe more life-threatening situations even. I mean, being captured in Iraq and all those things. And I mean, those kinds of issues don't seem to come up for them. So that's one point. And if you can address that, Adam, and also Colonel Aboagye. Also, Colonel talked about the fact that tattoos, and it's good that you raised that point about the fact that, you know, the Bible, Leviticus talks about tattoos, you know, and all of that. I'm tempted to think that we're influenced a lot more by our religious beliefs, considering that a lot of Ghanaians eat lobsters and prawns, and Leviticus also does talk about not eating shellfish. Would you say that apart from some of these reasons that you're giving, there's also a lot of what our society dictates as right and wrong and perception and religion? Do you think that these things really maybe play much more of a role in these determinants than we're willing to admit?
Who starts?
You can start.
Okay. Now, let me agree with all that you've said about the U.S. Army. You realize that the average British officer does not keep a beard. In fact, the average British citizen doesn't wear beard until recently when, you know, cultures are being changed. But there are other cultures where if you don't keep a beard, you don't seem to be a man. So there is everything about culture to these issues.
Okay.
There's a cultural dimension. Now, if the U.S. has relaxed the rules, as they indeed appear to be relaxing the rules to recruit or admit lesbians and gay and so on into their services, does that mean that globally around the world, everybody else must relax their rules?
I don't want to think that you're likening tattoos and, you know, to being lesbian.
I'm not challenging you. I'm just speaking to the issue.
Okay.
The whole idea is that any scarring of the body, especially tattooing, can induce skin cancer. In my own village, I've seen, in fact, those who also bleach. I think that is one of the criteria.
Yes.
There are persons who have bleached and later on are suffering serious skin cancer. So there are good reasons, in fact, medical reasons and health reasons, scientifically based, why some of these types of lifestyles should not be admitted into the services. The question of the tattoos again, and I think my colleague Adam mentioned it, it is not just tattooing. They send out messages, and some of the messages could be, you know, what the issue is in the space, the critical race theory, supremacy theories, and those kinds of things, or some religious messages that look down upon, you know, other groups and so on. You don't want those kinds of divisions within your security services. You want people to associate as one team, you know. So I will agree that, yes, the U.S. is doing it, but I don't think because the U.S. is doing it, it is time for everybody else to do it. If a U.S. Soldier, GI, who has tattooed the body, suffers skin cancer, they have a huge medical infrastructure. And I believe one of the reasons why the U.S. doesn't want to admit lesbians is about the cost. I have not really understood what the cost is. You know, it looks like that lifestyle comes with a lot of health problems. You see, So I will endorse the rejection or disqualification of those who have tattooed their bodies. But I think it should be relaxed for piercing of the ear. The rest of them should be maintained.
And what about stretch marks, Colonel?
Oh, stretch marks, yes. Stretch marks has the same issue. They can be health issues. They can, degenerate into wounds that have to be treated. So it comes with logistics.
I beg to differ on that, and maybe we should get a health expert in. But
the idea is that when the skin stretches, the skin has naturally altered. The whole question is that you're going to join a service where you're going to wear uniform for a considerable length of time. You see, then if you have worn uniforms, you know that, in fact, if you see soldiers, that's what I can relate to. When we remove our shirt, you see that our arms around our neck are very, very black. And then the rest of the place that is covered, is fairly fair. There's a lot of heat that generates under those uniforms and in those boots. So let me admit that maybe I didn't argue well for the stretch marks, but there's something about stretch marks that becomes a health issue. And maybe another expert can speak to that.
Sure. So, Adam Bona, there are those who look at all these the criteria that's being used, and they just come to the conclusion that the services simply want to, cut down on the numbers. So for the immigration, apparently 28,000 people applied, and they're looking for maybe about 2,000. So they have to find all sorts of ways to just, reduce or eliminate people. Isn't that about time we took a look at all of these criteria and probably, yes, use some medical advice or get some science behind it?
Well, you might be right. They might be out there also trying to reduce the numbers, obviously, because they had approval for just 2,000, applicants to be recruited, qualified applicants to be recruited. But just as the issue of tattoos. So what your colleague read on the internet about the U.S. soldiers, yes, to a very large extent, it is true. But I do also know, because I have colleagues who actually work within the U.S. and senior officers and all that. And I am aware, I do know that, so for instance, if you were getting deployed to an Arab country, so you are talking about, you are getting deployed to Syria, or you are getting deployed to some of these Arab or Arabian countries. If you carry a certain tattoo, you will not be deployed. Do you remember the U.S. has a very large army, and therefore they are able to select who should go. So recently, when the U.S. had to withdraw from, what's the name, this country? What's the name? This country, they recently, say it again?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yes. You notice that when they were in, Afghanistan, wherever they were camping, they had to ensure that a certain graffiti, you didn't have to put a certain graffiti because that was, offensive. But you go to most U.S. bases, they come up with all sorts of funny graffiti. And so if you, for instance, were carrying, a certain tattoo on you as a U.S. Army officer, that to any Muslim or any Arab, that is offensive to the religion, and you were captured, you would know that they will not be lenient with you. If even they are interpreted, because obviously when they go to some of these countries, they work with the local people. So they would usually deploy people who qualify at a certain level to be deployed. And so let's not mix it up, because usually they will put out some of this information on the internet and leave out those that they think we shouldn't know. But I'm telling you for a fact that tattoos and all these things carry a lot of messages. And so if you deploy people who are, let's say you have the, Arab-Jew conflict. So you are deploying people into an area that you know that if you were carrying a message that is portraying a certain message to the Arabian, they would see you even though you are there for peacekeeping. So let's say you are, what do you call it, a Ghanaian, and you have an Israeli flag, tattooed on your body, and you are deployed to Syria, or you are deployed to Sudan, you are deployed to any, Islamic country. You know that, first of all, the local people will not want to work with you because there is that perception. There will be that perception that you are in bed with probably some of the people they don't like. Is it John Pencil? When we were at the World Cup or one of the tournaments, it was just an Israeli flag he brought out after a goal had been scored. And that took, an international dimension that some of us thought, well, what is going on here? He later on came to apologize.
So essentially, someone like me, Israel, I can't be deployed to Syria or anywhere else if I was in the army.
No, it is. I am only. It's a name. What I'm trying to say is that your name. This is a name given to you at birth. The fact that you have Israel doesn't mean that you are from Israel. But what I'm trying to say is that you put on tattoos. You didn't give yourself the name Israel. I'm sure your parents would have given that to you. Yeah. So let's separate. All right. Let's focus on tattoos. Mine is that tattoos at a certain level are not permissible within the security services. All right. And let's also remember that, like my colleague Festus did say, the Americans are now relaxing some of their own stance on some of, when it comes to, lesbianism, gayism and all that. They are beginning to relax some of the laws. But the truth is that this has been with them for years, and probably for purposes of cost, purposes of health and all that, these people are so restricted. And so mine is that let's be careful with the conversation so that we don't just say, because they are the number they are supposed to recruit is small, they are finding other ways and means to get our people. If you are not qualified based on height, based on tattoos you have, based on stretch marks, based on, I think that, we would have to, the conversation should continue, but let's not make it look like the reason given are not good reasons. Some of the reasons are very good. And so we shouldn't be seen to be pushing the security agencies because today Ghana is peaceful. If you are deployed and you are employed or recruited, you are sent to Sudan as a peacekeeper, and something happens. Who do we blame? Do we blame the recruiter, or we blame us who forced them or who said they should change the way they do things?
All right. Well, we're not going to force anybody to do that. We just feel that a conversation should be had, and that's a conversation that we're having. But I want to end on this note, and quite associated with it, though it's not one of the criteria. But what do you make, and I'll start with you, Colonel FESTUS ABOAGYE, what do you make of this requirement that you're supposed to buy a form for 100 cedis and before you apply and all of that? Why can't the government bear the cost?
Well, thanks for that question. Well, let me quickly make a comment on that. The idea that we're using some of these criteria to weed off and cut down the numbers. There is some truth in that. You're looking for 2,000, as you said, and you have to now manage, let's say, 10,000, 15,000. You've got to find ways of, first of all, reducing the numbers before you start critically looking at. Let's know that they haven't even gone for the medical. And that's another serious criteria, So I support the idea that if you're going to take in 1 year 600 soldiers at LWAC, that's all the Ghana forces require. And then they had to handle about 3,000. They group them into 10s, 20s, 50s, and put them on the 100-yard stretch, blew the whistle, and then took only 5, out of the number, or a certain number out of the lot, just to find ways and means of reducing the numbers. But as Adam said, you don't use arbitrary benchmarks. You use the same criteria weed down, cut down the numbers. So there's nothing wrong with that. But on the question that you just asked, can you remind me again, please?
About the application form you're supposed to pay.
You see, in the previous year, if not last year, about 2 or so years ago, this debate came up that if people are paying for forms and there is a high degree that they're not going to be taking, there's a bit of, exploitation in there. In any case, how much is the form? If you add all the HR work behind the form, how much is it? There's something about it that is contrary to labor laws. I headed an international organization, the African Peace Support Trainers Association. When we advertised per Kenyan law that all recruitment, whatever, must be advertised for 2 weeks in certain types of daily, we did that at the cost of the organization. You didn't need to recoup or recover those costs from those who are applying. The same applies in South Africa, the same applies in Ethiopia, everywhere. Why is it that these security agencies have now found a way of making profits out of recruitment? And I think last year, one of the suggestions was, okay, in that case, all those who do not pass must have a refund. Their monies must be reimbursed to them. It's not fair, And I think this is in the domain of labor laws. Why anybody must pay for forms and then go at the first stage of body selection, physical selection, be disqualified. And that is not to talk about the cost. As we are speaking, I have a relative from my village from Jasu who has come and it's in Accra. The logistical cost, the inconveniences, you see what I mean, on top of the cost of the forms. If he or she doesn't pass at this first stage, or even if he or she fails at the last stage, medical and so on, I think we need to review that.
All right.
Can the Immigration Service bear the cost of this exercise? Whatever it is, and make it part of their budget that they take to Parliament and get the money given to them by the state to spend on the recruitment. The other side of the forms is that you might think the 100 cities is maybe too cheap. But we know that in this society that we are, 100 cities is a lot of money. And therefore, because some people cannot afford 100 cities, they don't stand the chance of getting recruited into these services. In other words, there's a bit of lack of equity or inequity there. That the playing field is not level for everybody. It is only those who can afford the 100 cities. And then the idea that if in a day, you can only handle 50 or 100, why do you bring 3,000 people to Elwak or anywhere else? Why? Why can't you work with a number and call them in batches of whatever the number is that you can handle in a day? Thereby, you reduce the time that people have to spend away from their home. You reduce the inconvenience. I saw one lady sitting down, maybe tired. You see, it doesn't mean she's not physically fit. So we need to look at some of these managerial aspects of recruitment.
All right.
They don't speak well. As said on other platforms, that people will be watching recruitment and the way they are running up and down, holding their paper. I mean, if somebody is holding their paper in their hand, what has that got to do with recruitment? Why can't they walk, leisurely?
Thank you.
They're not doing that because the numbers are too large.
Thank you very much.
Somebody failed to manage the numbers.
Colonel Abooagye, thank you very much for your insights, but we'd have to end the conversation here. I'd want to take your final thoughts on this same issue, Adam Bonan.
Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, I think that deliberately, because there is lack of employment for, our young persons or our children, most of these young people, lack of places for them to be recruited or employed. Some of them actually sometimes try to play around when they are filling the forms. I've had persons who spoke to me, and sometimes you see them and you say, looking at your height, you will be disqualified. They will still go and buy the form, buy the card, and go and apply, and go to the body selection. Be invited for body selection, only to be disqualified.
Yeah.
And so mine is that, yes, probably the amount being charged should be looked at. But when you deliberately decide to, that you're looking at the requirement, you don't qualify. You still go by forms. Don't go for it. I have people, young persons who, your grades, these grades you have, you are, disqualified straight away. They still go and buy the scratch card, put in their details, and then be disqualified, and they print the disqualification notice they receive. And so mine is that I really have no qualms about the amount of money being charged. The truth is that anyone who works with the security agencies will tell you that sometimes the money that are supposed to come in for them to undertake some of these exercises isn't coming. But I agree with my colleague Festus on the fact of, getting them, all of them, budged up, putting all of them at one location in the midst of COVID. I mean, I think that
that's something that should be looked at. Okay.
Yes. They should call them in back, just like you said.
Right.
I think that is more humane and decent than treating them the way they are treating them at the moment.
All right. Thank you to you both, Adam Bona, security analyst, and to you, Colonel Festus Aboagye, retired, also security analyst. We appreciate your time here on the AM show. I'm sure the conversations will continue, and on our social media handles, you can join in and let's get to hear what you make of it. But we're taking a break here on the AM show. We have more coming up. Don't go away.